The line between non-legendary and legendary Pokémon is usually pretty thick. Jigglypuff, not legendary. Lugia, legendary. Rotom, if you've only played recent games, you wouldn't understand why I would even consider this commonly seen Pokémon to be a legendary on par with Mewtwo, Rayquaza, or Dialga, but there are a few quirks to Rotom's early appearances that suggest it may have at least been considered for the role of legendary. I have poured through Rotom's appearances, and I think I have finally cracked the decades-old mystery of Rotom's legendary status. In Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, the player can encounter Rotom at the old chateau in the post-game. At nighttime, the TV in this haunted mansion appears to be on, and if you interact with it, Rotom comes out to play. When Rotom is encountered, it plays the same encounter music that you hear when you battle Heatran, Regigigas, Giratina, and even Darkrai. When you trigger the battle, it also does this weird spinny encounter transition, which is also associated with legendaries. It's strange for a regular static encounter to have these sorts of characteristics. In fact, no non-legendary Pokémon in the entire series has different battle music except for Rotom. Rotom does have an unusually low level for a legendary at level 15. However, there have been some legendary encounters at as low as level 30 before this. And later on, Regigigas appears at level 1 in Pokémon Platinum. Yes, seriously. So, high encounter levels is not a prerequisite to being a legendary. So, if you're encountering Rotom for the first time and haven't heard of the Pokemon before, you would probably assume that this is a legendary. I certainly did. Rotom, however, is able to breed, which is something that legendaries are not associated with, being all one of a kind and whatnot. However, Manaphy can breed with Ditto as well, and Manaphy is unambiguously a legendary Pokemon in Gen 4. I know it's a mythical, but the mythical denomination actually came about in Gen 5, so they were all legendaries back then. But Manaphy doesn't breed another Manaphy. It breeds a Phione. But Phione can breed more Phione, and Phione is a legendary Pokemon as well. Phione's legendary/mythical status was disputed for a while for this reason, but it was eventually confirmed mythical, which kinda means that breeding is not a disqualifier of legendariness. But the biggest piece of evidence that convinced me that Rotom was in fact a legendary was its Pokédex number placement. Rotom is placed between two groups of Pokemon in the Pokédex. The first group are the new Sinnoh evolutions, and directly after Rotom are all the Sinnoh legendaries. But there's one other major disqualification of Rotom's legendary status. Its base stats. It has a 440 base stat total, which is the same as Qwilfish. Qwilfish. Rotom then got a few changes in Pokemon Platinum. Rotom can now be encountered as soon as you reach the old chateau right after the second badge instead of in the post-game. While it still has legendary encounter music, the fact that it's an early encounter is a massive blow to the pro-legendary side of this debate. Who gets a legendary with 2 badges? But Rotom also got something that only legendaries got in Platinum: new forms, each based on a household appliance. Not only did Rotom get new forms, but those forms were event exclusive, meaning that the appliance versions of Rotom were on the same plane as Pokemon like Deoxys, Mew, and Arceus. This event exclusivity would not last. In Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Rotom can be granted access to its other forms without needing a special event item. If the player enters the Silph Co elevator with Rotom first in the party, they can access a room with all of the form-changing appliances. This is definitely a downgrade to the exclusivity of the Rotom forms, but to be honest, it's a welcome change, as it made the forms more available to players who didn't happen to get the initial event. So I think in Gen 4, the devs were unsure about Rotom's legendary status. They were just kind of toying with the idea of it being a legendary, but didn't want to fully commit to it. Rotom's presence in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers games, I think, really speaks to this. Despite being one of the major new Gen 4 Pokemon, Rotom is barely present within the game. It's a version exclusive to Explorers of Darkness and also appears in Explorers of Sky in one dungeon, Midnight Forest, which is an optional dungeon that can be unlocked through finding a random side quest, meaning many players would likely never visit this dungeon throughout their entire playthrough. Rotom appears in this dungeon in its lowest floors and has an unlikely spawn and recruit rate. This is as close to Rotom just being completely left out of the game as the devs could have possibly gotten. I think this speaks to a reluctance to use Rotom as a legendary, but also not wanting to completely downgrade it to non-legendary status by having it appear so flippantly in regular dungeons. So, they hid it away. While one could argue this means that Rotom is definitely not or never was a legendary, since even all the way back then they had it be a repeatable regular encounter, I think this more so speaks to an indecisiveness on the part of the devs. This brings us to Gen 5. In Pokemon Black and White, Rotom can be obtained through a once per game in-game trade for a Ditto. For me, this was the first time I accepted that Rotom is in fact not a legendary, but don't you think this is still odd exclusivity? A Pokemon only being available through in-game trade isn't something we see often, even though it was prevalent in Gen 1. Seems like at this point they want Rotom to be special, but not legendary, as not only does this regular trainer have one, but he's even willing to part with it for a non-legendary Pokemon like Ditto. And from then on, Rotom just becomes a regular, uncommon, bordering on rare Pokemon. Hard to believe at this point that this Pokemon originated with the same battle music as Giratina and Darkrai. Today, Rotom is actually one of the most prevalent Pokemon in the entire series. In Generation 7, the Pokédex was possessed by a Rotom, similar to how Rotom possesses the appliances it takes the form of. And starting in Generation 8, Rotoms now come included with every phone and bike. No way this is a legendary now, it's everywhere! But even though Rotom is not a legendary today, I just don't understand why it had that battle music all the way back in Gen 4, or why it's placed next to all these legendaries in the Pokédex, or why it got event-exclusive alternate forms. Why would a non-legendary Pokemon get that sort of treatment? I think I figured it out. So, Rotom isn't actually the only disputed legendary of Gen 4. In fact, it's one of 3. We already went over Fion before, but Lucario also had a strange semi-legendary status during this time. Maybe this is just playground rumor anecdotes, but I heard Lucario referred to as a legendary all the time back in the day. In Black and White, Zoroark was basically a mythical Pokemon, as it could only be obtained in an event. So, why is this legendary Pokemon distinction so important? It's all about marketing. Legendary Pokemon sell games, they sell cards, they sell movie tickets. That's why legendaries are just about always on the box art. Because legendaries are so important to the marketing of Pokemon, the Pokemon Company has to be extremely careful about how they use them. Oversaturate the legendary pool and they lose their moxie. Have too few legendaries and you lose your marketing edge. So, what if you had an in-between? What if there were more legendaries, but some of them are just legendarier than others? Design some legendaries to be mysterious and special without taking away from your big marketing juggernauts. That's what Rotom was supposed to be. The same goes for Lucario, Fion, and Zoroark. And for some reason or another, Game Freak decided against moving forward with the experiment, instead opting to have either legendary/mythicals or non-legendaries with no in-between. This is why Rotom had legendary music but was still able to breed and had a low stat total. It was supposed to be a lower tier of legendary. Still special, but not as special as the truly once per game better legendaries. So that's why Rotom was the way it was from a marketing perspective. But is there also perhaps an in-universe explanation for this? I mean, why is it that there's only one Rotom in the region of Sinnoh, yet in Galar there's so many of them they're getting stuffed in phones? I think that the mysterious nature of Rotom, as well as its ability to be bred, led to a human-made overpopulation, which in turn destroyed the very mysteriousness that made it so popular in the first place. What was once an urban legend about the spirit of the old chateau is now a commercially available product. Much like how Game Freak saw that Rotom had no use as a creature of legend, so did the people of the Pokemon world. And Rotom fell from the stuff of legend to the stuff of the mundane. But what do you think? Do you think it's possible that Game Freak was trying to make a new subclass of legendary? Do you think it would have worked if they committed to it? Do you think Game Freak thought about any of this, or am I just nuts? Let me know in the comments below. Hey, if you like this video, check out this other Pokemon video on Pokestar Studios from Pokemon Black and White 2. Or if you're interested in some of my other content, check out this other video right here. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, consider becoming a channel member or checking out my Patreon, link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.